Welcome to Fish 307 Ice Fishing Demo Days. I'm Nathan Krusko, owner of Northeast Ice Fishing, and I'm the host of Northeast Ice Fishing Talk Show. I'm here to give you guys a little insight into nighttime ice fishing. How many guys here have been ice fishing at night? How many guys are out there specifically targeting crappie? How many were using underwater lighting? One guy. Well, the great thing with crappie fishing, crappie are far more active in the evening, much like other species like walleye and some of the trout. The use of underwater lighting with ice fishing is a relatively new thing. There's only a few of us that are using specifically designed products just for this purpose. Many years guys have been using like old car headlights, unhooking them, putting a battery on them and dropping them on top of the ice, using the glow of their lanterns as an attraction, helping to bring the fish to their shelter. The system I'm talking about is more of bringing fish to a location, but not to a specific point or hole. When using underwater lightings, there's different systems you can use. You can either use a product specifically designed for this purpose, a light just for underwater ice fishing. You can use your camera. How many guys have underwater cameras? They have lights on, right?
Yep.
During the daytime, they really don't do much for you. At nighttime, they do a lot. They help bring in fish. There's a guy in the back, Luke, there. His first experience with this was jaw-dropping. I guess you could attribute it to I got him hooked immediately. He was just addicted. What it is, in many of our lakes around here, you have a good milfoil base, and you got roaming crappie. But people can't find a crappie during the daytime because they're roaming and coming in and out of the basins, hitting the shallows occasionally, but no consistent patterns. But the biggest consistent pattern is they start feeding close to dusk, and they start feeding close to the weed lines. The reason why they start feeding close to dusk is that's when they come out of their daytime relaxation mode and they start seeking out minnows. They're seeking refuge within these weed lines. Smaller fish like perch, real young of the year perch are settling in the bottom of these weed lines. Same thing with small bluegill. As far as panfish go, crappie are a top line predator. They will eat other perch. They will eat other bluegill that are smaller than them. You may catch plenty of bluegill they can't eat, but there's lots of them that are this size, and that's just bite size for them. So what you do is, in targeting these fish at night, you have to know a little bit about the lay of the lake. Inside turns. How many guys fish an inside turn know what an inside turn is? Inside turn on a contour line is like the corner of a room, for example. You know, as the lake curves and comes around, right there's the inside of the turn. Those insides will usually lead out to deeper waters. The fish will come up into them like a funnel, like a deer going up a gully, and once they hit the top of that, they spread out into the weed lines. So what you do is you try and find a place like that, or you look for submerged points or humps, where at the end of along the end of a delta for a stream, you got the sand delta or mud delta that goes out into the pond and drops off both sides. The fish will also come up on the top of that and roam around if it's nothing but a mud flat. You look for those two places for starters. When you get there, I'm recommending you at least, if you're going to go for your first time, go there a little bit before dark, an hour or 2 hours before dark. And I'll discuss other things that you can do if you don't have that option. What you do is you get to that area and you kind of sort of pick out the center of that location you want to start fishing. You're going to drop a hole and you put in your underwater light source. And if you're fishing in about 22 feet of water, I recommend you put your light about 12 feet down. 10 to 12 feet down, halfway in the water column. Reason for the halfway point in placing your light is you picture that light as a ball. As it's illuminating around that, you get light illuminating up above, all sides, and below. The closer you pull that light to the surface, the less of a broadcast area you're going to have below that light. So you get within 50% of the water column, you're maximizing your illumination area. Once you've located that spot where you want to place your light, start drilling a hole pattern around that, like a spokes on a wheel. You go out from that hole, and you go out 5 feet. But then you go out 10 feet. And then you start going 10 paces. And you keep going around and around that hole. How many guys use power augers? Everybody, right? Hopefully. The hand auger guys, it might take a little bit more work. But what you're going to end up doing is, with your camera, with your underwater light, you're ultimately going to end up acquiring a fishable area about 60 feet across. How many guys use sonar? This is the #1 key in fishing crappie. You're looking for suspended fish. So once you got that light set, you got your radial hole pattern set, every 10 paces drilling a hole. Start hopping around looking for the fish, looking for those suspended fish and working within that. As the evening goes on and it starts to get more and more dark, the fish are going to begin congregating towards the center of that light. The reason why they're congregating towards the center of that light is these lights attract zooplankton. Zooplankton attract bait fish. Bait fish have been proven to be attracted to green and blue light, not white light. When the bait fish come into that, anybody ever heard of the term called gill click? It's like in your open water bays or even some of your jigging wraps. Got little BBs in them. Those BBs are in there for a purpose, to simulate gill click, to trigger a feeding response from predator fish. So as those bait fish begin to get attracted to that light and start congregating and feeding on those zooplankton, they start emitting more and more of that noise, thus bringing your fish into that central location. So as the evening's going on, you're going to want to start getting closer and closer to that light. And by the end of the night, ideally you'll only be about 10 feet from your light. If it's a camera, you might be able to be on top of that thing all night long if you happen to get a good spot where you're able to attract a bait fish. Guys that aren't using sonar run into a lot of problems finding these fish. If you're using a sonar, you're looking for those suspended bars. Guys that aren't using sonar are shooting in the dark almost. I recommend at least trying 50% of your water column with your first presentation. Go around, hit all your holes, see if something happens there. If that's not working, try a couple feet above that. You know, so if you're in 20 feet of water, try the first one at 10. Next one at 7. Crappie, when they feed, they look out and up. So if they're at 10 feet and you're dropping your jig down to 16 feet all the time, it's scooting right by them. If they're not right there at the time this is dropping by, you're blowing right past them. You're out of their range. And if you're fishing on sonar, if you happen to notice them, you'll see them possibly move down and follow that because they caught sight of it on the way by. That's the hardest thing guys run into in fishing crappie. Is fishing too deep. You know, we all get programmed and accustomed into dropping it down the bottom, reeling up a couple turns, and we work the bottom foot of water column. Well, you're fishing 8 feet below the fish. They're not going to turn up and look down like that and they're looking for the bait 8 feet below them when all the minnow they're looking for are suspended right in their area. That's probably the biggest hurdle that a lot of people have overcome, is the fact that you're fishing too deep. The other thing is, now that we're fishing at night, we have to be concerned with not just our light attracting fish, but now our presentation's attracting fish. How many guys use glow jigs? Is there a reason why you use glow jigs? Other than the fact that everybody's using them? And they look pretty when you shine a light on them?
Use them because they work.
There's different colors of glow jigs. You got white, you got green, and you got red. Red glow jigs glow the longest and strongest. White glow the brightest, and green glows the weakest. When nighttime fishing applications, I recommend you at least get into a white jig. It stands out the most. It contrasts the most with the dark conditions that you're in now. You look for something that contrasts. This jig right here is my #1 go-to jig in this place. If you were to go upstairs and ask Luke, get me Nathan's jig, this is what he's going to grab you. Any of my nighttime crappie fishing applications or even nighttime bullhead fishing applications was all been with a little white glow jig. That's it. I've tried other colors like reds and greens. Reds have worked occasionally, but your most consistent success was always on a white glow jig. Tipping that jig, there's lots of options out there. The good old classic minnow is a nice option, jigging a minnow head or a whole minnow. A minnow head is great. They just, for some reason, they can't resist it, and they're not grabbing the back end of that minnow while you got a hook through the head and ripping off bait on you. They're forcing them to go right for that hook point. Soft plastics are another great one. Soft plastics in crappie is just darn right lethal at times. It almost doesn't seem fair in some of the applications. But if you're out there fishing on like a really negative slow crappie bite, just a classic single waxworm. You know, not a gob of Euro larva, just a single waxworm or a single Euro larva, or waxy or mousy, whatever you want to call them. Spike or mousy rather. That's a great choice. But in order to feel their strike, you have to have a sensitive rod. Who uses ultralight rods with 2-pound line? Only a couple. Who uses 4-pound line and light action rods? You find that 4-pound line and heavier line is kind of stiff in the water column and may take away from you feeling a really light presentation, forcing you to want to use heavier presentations? That's what's happening. You're going to want to downgrade. Crappie are notorious for lifting up your presentation on you. I told you they feed out and up, right? So if they see something that's over there, they're going to swim up to it, grab it, and lift it. If you're using a rod that is too heavy, that's not loaded, when your jig is on, and I say loaded, I want you to be fishing with a rod that's light enough that when you tie a jig on, that tip loads just a little bit, bends down. And you need to be rock solid when you're paying attention to these bites. You look for that little bit of bend, and when you see that bend return and come up, it's obviously not natural unless you got really bad coffee shakes like I do at times. And on today, that's highly probable. You have to fish with really light line and really light jigging poles. Use of spring bobbers is extremely important to some of this. Guys like to use spring bobbers. I prefer to use a really fine tipped rod. A rod that has a guide with no feet on it. You might go upstairs and find some fishing poles that have the guide is slid over the end of the rod. It's got a little leg on one side, a little leg on the other side. Kind of a nice big heavy tip. You don't need anything like that. You look for something that's really, really light on the very tip. The lighter it is, the more action it's going to help you in detecting those bites. So when you're jigging, you at least know that you've got a good jig, something's going to attract the fish. You got a good bait. You're going with really light line. You don't need 4-pound line or 6-pound line because that's what you're used to in summertime. You know, in summertime, well, I use 4-pound line because that's considered ultralight fishing. 2-pound line or even pound line is perfectly fine for all wintertime applications. I know there's a guy in the back that he uses pound and a half line and he catches buckets of fish. And I doubt I've heard of him breaking off fish maybe more than a handful of times. And that's only because they're scooting around the hole and cutting it on the ice. These little rods will take away all that stress and all that tension of that light line, helping you get over that issue of worrying about breaking your line. The smaller that line is, the better connection you're going to have to this. The better you're going to feel that going down there and jigging below you. The sense of feeling is probably the next thing along with keeping an eye on this. How many guys when you're out there fishing, you're fishing like this? Arm out to the side. Do you find it hard detecting a bite when your arm's out like this?
Well, I mostly fish for perch. So.
Yeah.
No, not really. I feel them as soon as they hit.
When you're crappie fishing and you want to keep an eye on your tip, try and get yourself in a solid position. You know, some guys will set their fishing pole on a bucket right next to them, and well, that's solid. You know, it's not going anywhere. So they find they have a hard time holding the fishing pole because it's shaking too much in their hand. Get yourself in a position like this, sitting on your bucket, and just hold that thing. You're solid here. You have no movement. You're locked tight. If that tip moves at all, it's not as much from your shaking, it's from the reaction of a fish below you. If you're holding out like this, you know, it's easy to, you know, we're moving around, it's easy to accidentally move your fishing pole. I'm not telling you to be obsessively controlled with it, but just be aware of how much movement you're making and how much you want to watch that little presentation. Because it's little subtle things where crappie will bite you. They are masters of stealing bait. They've eluded many fishermen, and they probably eluded some of you at times, thinking, geez, you know, the fish just aren't there. Well, they're stealing your bait on you, and you're just not noticing because your rod's moving. Nighttime fishing opportunities, I'm talking a lot about crappie fishing because crappie is probably one of the more sought after fish because they're difficult and they're challenging for some guys during the daytime. But there's other opportunities. In some waters we're able to nighttime fish smelt. Smelt will come into these lights. I was using an underwater light out on Lake George, New York last year with the intention of finding crappie. There are crappie in that lake. I was out there trying to find them. But what I was having that evening was I was attracting zooplankton, but the smelt were coming in like crazy. You can also use the underwater light to help attract smelt. Now that's a whole nother ball game and a whole nother fishing opportunity right there in itself. Is the smelt were congregating like unbelievable. I was in like maybe 30 feet of water that day. Any given point in time I had 10 feet worth of smelt. And they track that. The other thing is bullhead. Who's caught a bullhead through the ice? They fight like crazy, don't they? When you're out crappie fishing on some of these mud bottom lakes or in a weed bed with a nice muck bottom, never hurts to take a dead stick with you. Set that up with a minnow on a little white jig, 2 or 3 feet off bottom. Bullhead have come into lights. I took Luke upstairs and I think a couple other guys from here out fishing one night, and we were catching bullhead, bluegill, and crappie all in one evening. So we're not just targeting one species, we also have other opportunities. If you're looking to target walleye, like in Saratoga Lake for example, you don't have to walk that far. You get out in the weed line, get out in 7 feet of water or so, drop in your light, and you can fish all the way into 3-4 feet deep. Walleye love cruising the shallows. The shallows we've caught them is about 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water. That's where you're mixing in a little bit of tip-up action with some jigging. So you get your light out there, you set some tip-ups in more towards the shallow part of the area. You start fishing bigger spoons, chubby darters, or jigging wraps out towards the deeper part of your lighting pattern. So there's more than just fishing crappie. Nighttime fishing is a great way to extend your season. Part of the reason why I'm talking about nighttime fishing this year so much is I can understand the frustration level of having to wait for ice, and this year we're waiting for ice longer than we should be. And in our busy schedules, we wait all week long, and like last year, we wait all week to get out on the weekend. Thursday afternoon comes, you get 2 feet of snow dumped on the lake, and now you're stuck with a lake covered in slush like Lake George had last year a couple times. Yet, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday evenings were beautiful. You could have walked out on glare ice. But we're all sitting home thinking, geez, I can't wait till the weekend comes. Saturday morning, you wake up, well, I'm stuck shoveling. I'm giving you guys the opportunity to say, you know what? I'm not going to be a weekend warrior anymore. I'm going to leave my ice fishing gear in the back of my truck or in the back of my car, and after work, I'm going to head out to the lake. When doing that, this is where you have to take a little more caution. And earlier I talked about finding that location during the daylight hours and looking for that. How many people use GPS? GPS or even other marking methods are great ways to keep an eye on your place, but GPS for nighttime fishing is very, very important. get to know the body of water that you plan on going. If you're going to only be able to go out at night after work, after the sun's already set, take one of those weekend days and swing over to that spot and kind of scope out the area. Look for weak ice conditions or bad ice spots, places that you know you obviously want to avoid to keep yourself out of harm's way, because at nighttime a hole in the ice comes up on you real fast. That's where you get into a lot of danger. Mark a safe travel path on your GPS. We use Humminbird 835Cs on our ATVs. We mark a safe travel path on that, and we just follow that little line that we left from all of our past trips. We stay right to that to a T. So we're able to safely navigate the lake surface and go 2-3 miles at night without any concern or worries, because we've been carrying that same travel route. So at least do a little bit of homework on the weekend in preparation of the fact that, well, I'm going to be out at night fishing this week. I'm going to go out and mark some points. This is something you're going to see a lot more done with in the next few years. But this is something I'm hoping to see a lot of you guys out on the lakes this year. Glen Lake has crappie in it. Lake George has crappie in it. Carter's Pond has crappie in it. Cosuna has crappie in it. But I've been on all those lakes, and at nighttime, there's myself and maybe a couple guys I've taken with me. I have run into a couple people once in a while, but usually by 9 o'clock at night they're packing up and heading home. We're still sitting there until about midnight. So you go to work the next day a little bit tired. Something a couple cups of coffee can't fix. That, and you got the memory of an outstanding night on the ice. Any questions so far, guys? Nothing.
It's legal to put them down the hole?
In New York it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
It is in Vermont too. I actually checked it out
Yep.
back here.
It's currently not legal in the province of Ontario, and I want to say Minnesota.
That's right.
Michigan it's legal. I want to say Illinois it's legal. But at least check with your local game department and make sure. Yes,
What kind of a battery you gotta have for that
12 volt battery.
12 volt?
Yep. That light, I'm hoping by the end of the week, Jeff will be carrying it here in the store. You can get it straight from him. We all have 12 volt batteries in our flashers or our cameras, underwater cameras. 12 volt, 4 amp hour batteries is sufficient for any of your underwater lighting needs. I don't care what brand or what manufacturer you're using. That's on a 12 volt, 7 amp hour battery. I had that run for 48 hours in my garage in the start of March. It was still lit 48 hours later. So,
Any advantage to using that type of setup during the daylight hours?
yes. Daylight hours, heavy snowpack, low light conditions. They're amazing. They do, however, I have not had any success using them with perch yet. But I have not been investing a lot of time with perch because I have other proven techniques with perch. They're just, well, leaves me with no desire to want to use them with perch at this point. Yes.
Do they work good for would they work good for trout? Like
Yes.
rainbows?
Yes, especially in the open water conditions, they actually work great with them. James Vladica upstairs was out this past year with an outdoors rider, and they were using 4 underwater lights off the side of their boat, and they're casting spoons for trout. I will be doing some fishing on Lake Ontario with them this year for steelhead and brown trout, as well as parts of Lake Erie for trout and salmon. Trout and salmon do come in to bait fish at night, like in Milwaukee, for example. The guys fish right in the harbor, and they're catching trout and salmon at night like crazy. Yeah, and they're catching big fish in Milwaukee. Any other questions?
You catch bluegill at night?
Oh yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah. You would think the bluegill will settle down.
Yeah.
They do. Some of them do settle down at night, and as the night goes on, more and more settle down. But you still do have some very active bluegill in the 9-10 o'clock hour. By 11 o'clock, they're all pretty much gone to bed.
Yeah.
By 12 o'clock, now you're just into crappie and bullhead.
Have you used any of those LED ice hole lights that they have upstairs?
I have not used any of those yet. because I have a lighting system in my shelter, so I haven't used any of those yet. But any sort of lighting system to get you started is a great way to go. Just know that putting a light in your shelter is not like the end-all be-all. Create a fishing area. What you're doing is you're creating a feeding system, an ecosystem almost, you know. Basically, you're building a restaurant. You know, you're setting in the food base, and everybody's like, oh, geez, I see what's on the menu. We're going to swing by here. So that's what you're actually trying to create. You're trying to create a feeding stage. And then you want to fish and work around that stage. So in that case, if you were to use a whole light, try and use multiple. So if your only option you have right now at this point is illuminating from above, try illuminating from above in more than one location, because you're only illuminating a small area from above. So create multiple illumination points. You know, and a single battery as a central hub, and 4 wires going off different directions is going to suffice for that.
How far do you space the lights apart?
My lights, right now for the average presentation, I use just one light. If you're going to do multiple lights, you go out 20 feet.
Just so the edge of the illumination pattern touches the next light?
Like that, yes, exactly. That bulb right there will go out a little more than 40 feet at 15 feet of water. In my best case scenario in really clear water, I had close to 80 feet of fishable water. And with a power auger, I had a lot of holes. I had to watch my step. That's the other issue, watch your step at night. Any other questions, guys?
Color, red, you said? The light?
Red jigs,
No, for the light.
green.
Green.
Green attracts bait fish and it illuminates the farthest. Blue attracts bait fish, does not illuminate as far. White illuminates a very small area, because the white light gets displaced in the water column a lot more than the blues and the greens.
Does that work well with walleyes? Find that draws them in, you catch more using the light?
I'm fairly confident it's going to work well with walleyes. I have not invested a lot of time, and this year we're going to be investing a lot more time in walleyes. We're hopefully going to be hitting Oneida Lake and Lake Ontario as well. But walleye being a nighttime feeder naturally, any opportunity where you can congregate the bait fish for them is going to only help your success. So I wouldn't hesitate recommending to give it a try in your local water. But obviously give it a couple tries, not every day is like end all be all. Any other questions?
Walleye fishing, when you bore your holes out, somebody said you should bore all your holes, so because the walleyes are going to start out here and move close, so all your holes should be pre-drilled. Is that true? So like, let's say you had all your holes drilled, and as the night goes on, you want to come in closer.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you put your lights at that? Would you start your lights out, or just go ahead and put your lights in shallow and hope that you could bypass that window of deep fishing and have the fish come right on into the shallow? Or would that happen?
I would put the lights in a halfway point on the way into the shallows,
So it hit both?
to help bring the bait fish out of the weeds and help bring the walleye into the bait fish, kind of cut the distance.
Okay.
But in any of, and it's a good point about drilling your holes. Part of the thing I mentioned early on is the fact that you set your light or stage your fishing area and drill all your holes. Once you get there, drill all the holes you could possibly want to fish and put the auger away. Don't ever touch it for the rest of the night. With a hand auger, that will get a little challenging, but they do have some really good auger blades out there nowadays that'll help make it easier. This early in the year, get out there with your hand auger and just go at it. By the end of the year, you're going to be built like Arnold Schwarzenegger with a hand auger, but that's okay. Power auger, it just cut holes until you can't handle cutting holes anymore. In my typical fishing situation, it's not uncommon for me to go out there and cut 60 holes right at the very start of my fishing opportunity. I'm a tournament ice fisherman also, and for me, cutting a lot of holes is just second nature. If you've ever seen me on a body of water, I start out here, and before you know it, I'm at the shoe store across the road, cutting holes, and then back again, and then there again. So lots of holes. The more the merrier. Because you think of lots of holes as casts. Every hole you drill is another cast, another fishing opportunity. When we're shore fishing, we're casting here, here, and here, and then we're casting in shallow, 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 and then we're maybe pitching somewhere in between all them. No different with ice fishing. Every hole you make, you're essentially just giving yourself a new opportunity, a new cast point. Any other questions? Well, everybody, I hope I answered all your questions. I will be here all day, so if you have any further questions, you can stop up and ask me at any point in time. Any recommendations or jigs, lures, presentations, I'll help you out with that as well. But I thank you very much for your time. Stick around later. We'll be talking about deep water perching on Lake George, and then we'll be talking about tournament ice fishing tactics to help you make a better tournament